We'll have lots of opportunity to network and chat. I know I'm looking forward to it very much. So our next presentation is brought to us by Farm Credit Canada, and we're joined by Joel Bokenfohr. Joel helps primary producers with farm families make decisions on transition planning, farm management, and business structures. With his extensive agriculture and financial background, he works with entrepreneurs and agricultural advisors to create solid business and transition plans. Joel continues to farm in Sturgeon County, Alberta with his family. And so if you don't mind putting your hands together and welcoming Joel Bokenfohr to the stage to talk about the farm transition dating game.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for having me. Thank you to, I think I found your pen, Heather. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here. Appreciate the invite to talk about something that I'm really passionate about, and that's farm transition planning. So I get to be part of a great team. We've got a number of advisors across Canada, two of which, Anessa Good and Glenn Croker, are here as well. So you can catch up with them later as well. But really enjoy this topic of farm transition. And I think throughout the day, we've heard a lot of common themes about how important getting some of those business management pieces together are, how it ties into our transition plans, and what we want to do with it. So for this, it's going to be a little bit of a game that we'll play. This topic started a lot scrolling through Facebook like you do, and never seen the show in actuality, but 90 Day Fiancé kept popping up on my Facebook feed over and over, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm not going to watch this. And then so the first one plays, and you're hooked in the first minute, and then it's like, why is my whole feed 90 Day Fiancé? And I thought, holy, there's a lot of things going on here that are pretty similar to my job. And I thought, maybe I can combine the two of let's play the dating game while we talk about farm transition as well. So gonna have lots of fun. And again, if you're looking for kind of more of a formal matchmaking kind of thing, you might have to try your luck in the banquet room tonight or something if you're looking to expand some acres that way. But it is about farm transition, not exactly about dating. So with that, we'll play the game. So here we've got, fantastic couple kind of looking to parse things out, make a bit of a plan, what they want to get accomplished, and how they're going to work through a process here. And so I hope you're ready to meet kind of the eligible bachelors that are on this panel. If you're from Red Deer, right, this might look like your actual dating pool. It is something that, just kidding. But, before we go out to date, you got to kind of get ready to date, right? So we're going to talk about a little bit of how you get out there, how you get ready to do a few different things. We're going to talk a bit about some of the common issues that are out there in transition planning. So some things that we want to get accomplished in a plan, Do we want to play this game? Do we want to go down this route of transition? And what do we need to tackle before we get there? And then we're going to meet our eligible bachelors, right? Number one here, right? Maybe a little unrefined, but we've got our short-term goals. We're not quite sure, maybe a little rough around the edges, but we want to get things figured out. And in the short term, what are we dealing with in farm transition, right? We've got a lot of expectations. We've got a lot of hope about what it could be from both sides. A lot of excitement, but we're not quite sure yet. There's a lot to figure out. We also have a lot of uncertainty in these plans. So we're going forward, and it becomes so stressful to deal with that uncertainty. How do we start to unpack that and pull together a topic of what it could look like? And in the medium term, right, we've cleaned up maybe a little bit, right? We want to talk a little bit about what do we need to take into account as we're making things official? What could the plan look like? Where do we want to get started? And how's this strategy kind of fit into our medium-term plan as we go forward? And then long-term, right? We're cleaning things up a little bit, right? How do we keep it fresh in the plan? How do we kind of not let things stale? How do we evaluate, are we on track? And start to unpack ownership a little bit as well. But it can be overwhelming, right? So there's a lot of different things going on when you're dealing with transition, right? And there's lots of information on this slide. Again, similar to Stu's presentation, hoping that there's kind of time that you can go back and kind of piece through it. But I find I get to meet, and most of my career has been meeting with farms kind of in the early stages of trying to figure things out, either answering direct questions or trying to convince them that this process and that the juice is worth the squeeze a little bit if you go through this process and start to build things out. But as we build transition plans, there's a lot of advice out there, right? There's a lot of information. There's a lot of resources that are out there. And there's a bit of a theme of why so many presentations in there get come back to a lot of questions because, you've met with one family, everybody's got something a little bit different going on, and I think, okay, same thing, there's two farms side by side that you'd think they'd have the exact same goal, but, the conversation we had, if I had one with a similar farm and it's completely different from the farm that might be almost on paper the same, that what they want to do, what they want to get accomplished looks quite a bit different. So whenever you're doing a transition plan, just remember that it is your plan to take kind of account of, and there's going to be a lot of tools and a lot of resources out there to make sense of. And you want to pick the ones that are right for you kind of at the right time, that even though there's tremendous advice out there, tremendous resources, right, the right advice at the wrong time can still be wrong for you at certain points as well. That I find a lot of farms that, it's a lot of noise that we take in sometimes too on what we should do, but we want to go through this whole process here of most of the recommendations are back to breaking goals down, moving things forward, identifying what those goals are, starting to look a little bit about what are some of the problems that might come our way and what do we want to do about that as we go forward. We want to unpack things, kind of diagnose a bit of a solution here, start to talk a little bit about what's the plan that we can put into place for this specific goal, this specific problem, and how do we design a solution to come out of that and get to the part of what we want to do in the continual doing of putting this farm plan together. So I meet with a lot of people that are trying to figure this out, and there's so much bouncing around, or they've put so much information in that they're, continually worried about it. And I always come back that we don't solve problems by worrying about them. We want to just step back, do things one at a time, and keep repeating this process for what's coming to our minds. So these things really can be a lot of fun. You can have fun while you're doing a transition plan. There's lots of noise out there, and so sometimes this is something we come back to time and time again about what excites us to do this and how do we make sure that this is fun, because there's a lot of stress when we don't know what the outcome's going to be yet. So a lot of families are going through this process, and it's not necessarily that they're trying to delay, but they don't know how to assure the outcome that they want, right? We want the farm to continue. We want the family to be happy. We want to make this all work on paper, and how do we actually assure that outcome is something that paralyzes us a little bit from taking action or moving to the next step to keep things rolling. And we need to know that that's okay. That's really common. That's probably the most common thing I see, is that we're not sure exactly what that outcome's going to be, and we need to be okay that there's some discomfort there, that we're going to work through it and build a process for our family. Because it gets easy when you're going there that I always call it mind monsters a little bit, that we're trying to be truthful about, that we maybe don't have an answer yet, or we're not sure what the plan's going to look like in these early stages. And so we start to hold back information as a family. We start to maybe not share things because we want to wait and we want to figure it out. And what's scarier than kind of holding back information is the assumptions people make when they go searching for what that information is. They start to make assumptions, and they start to figure out their own answers in their own mind without ever checking or kind of looking at what it could be. And so we want to avoid that, right? And you can only control, as you get going in these things, like dating, the values that you're going to bring and how you're going to act. And we got to get out there and keep dating, right? You got to keep trying things as you go forward, right? You can't, Stu said he was from Prince Albert, so you can't stay home like him in high school in Prince Albert because you're all dressed up, right? There's nowhere to go, so you got to get out there and date. You had to come all the way to Edmonton to meet a nice girl. So it was something that you got to get out there a little bit, right? And get out there, try some things, right? And it is a process that will take some time as you go forward, but you want to evaluate this process as you're going forward. It's something you can keep simple. Can be repetitive or frustrating at times, but it's something that we want to keep going. And from my own farm, I know one that always stood out for us. It was the simplest little thing that we changed in our own process that made such a difference. We used to do things pretty ad hoc, right? Those that right, can't teach it and things like that. Well, we used to do it ad hoc, right? After a family meal, we'd just start unpacking stuff, or we'd share things, and this would drive me absolutely nuts because I would like to have information beforehand or when we're on the farm, right? If you weren't there for 7 a.m. coffee, decisions would get made about what's going to happen. So we started to unpack that process a little bit, and we separated our succession conversations and our operational ones. And we started meeting every Monday at a certain time, a set time, and we would prep our plan. And there's the tiniest little change in our process of what we were doing that honestly put us so much farther ahead, because we could identify, hey, this isn't working for all of us, and something we really need to kind of pencil out. And the other assumption, as you're going out there and dating as well, right, or figuring out transition, something you want to unpack and think about too before we play the game here is that in these plans, you either get to decide how they happen a little bit, you get to make the plan, make the choices and decide, or else indecision is the other side of it that I see a lot of, that we've procrastinated to a point where now we're farther down in our plan and we have less options available to start to make these choices or to start to make a plan. And I think this is almost worse as long as you're not, coerced into a decision or things like that. But this indecision where I see families that senior gens in their 80s and they're trying to make a plan to go forward and say, hey, I've already driven off 2 kids because they've been mad I don't have a plan, and now the grandkids are interested and I'm giving them the same sense of frustration. That indecision in these plans, I think, time and time again, is almost worse than kind of making some trade-offs and making some decisions to move forward. Right, and then you're ready to get out there, right? You kind of take that into your mind, you're ready to get out there, you're ready to play this game, you're saying, yeah, I am excited about this process, and maybe those are things that I can solve or talk about a little bit, put out there. But what do I got to do, right, before I'm ready to date, right? I got to get to know myself a little bit first, right? I got to get comfortable with what I'm really looking for before I go out there and find something otherwise. Like, was a right at Farm Tech about 7 years ago that asked me, how many kids did I have? And I said, well, we're not quite there yet. And he said, well, you must be spending a lot of time plowing and not enough time sowing, right? That you kind of get out there and if you're not sure what you're looking for in these plans, right? You find a lot of times getting out there kind of searching for it. So it can become challenging from that side of it. You want this roadmap to think about, what do I want? What am I looking for? What do we want to get accomplished? And then you start to think a little bit about how to identify, what that is. So I was looking for advice on the internet, right? And first one that popped up was Teen Vogue. And it said, well, you should play 21 questions. I thought, yeah, that's a good idea, right? You could get to know yourself, ask 21 questions about what it is that you really want. And maybe it goes a little bit beyond, what kind of ice cream cone are you, I guess, right? But can we use a tool that's going to help us to do that, right? And so a lot of it is trying to, in my world, I guess, is a lot of early conversations, right? Convincing that, we should go see some advisors after and things like that, but maybe we can unpack what's on our mind a little bit too. And so looking at it a little bit, we could use some tools that are out there to help explore and recognize that, it's not something we're going to solve instantly, but maybe we could take something like a business canvas for those of you that used, and then put it a little bit more in a family business context to say, hey, here's a tool. We can ask these questions that are going to guide and kind of shape our plan. It's not like we'd have to solve this all at once, but they'd be simple questions to guide and things that we need to ask. We need to know, right, the key partners that are involved. What's our family going to look like in this process? Who's going to be involved? Who's not going to be involved, right? What advisors do I need to bring into this process? I always recommend, right, if this is something we're going into a process and there's a high risk that if we do it wrong, it's going to have some big implications, that's when we want to get out there and say, hey, maybe we should bring somebody in that has been there, can help us pick that right direction. Key activities, right? What are those things? What are the things that we're doing day to day that are going to reinforce and keep us moving forward? And how's that going to change over time? What do we want to see? What do we want to encourage? What kind of behavior do we want to get accomplished in this? And then current state, right? What is our farm actually? We heard a lot about different ways to analyze things this morning, but what is our farm comprised of? What's our ownership structure look like? What are some of those limiting factors that might influence our business strategy as we go forward? And what's our debt environment, and who do we expect to pick that debt up long term? So you can start to pull that together, and time again, it's mom's reminding dad when we meet that they bought that Miller quarter 3 weeks ago or something, or it's in the company, or that's part of it, that we necessarily sometimes don't always have it mapped out on paper. And if we've got that as part of our plan to go forward with, right, we can put it on the table and we can take it to all of our advisors and bring that common message as we bring them in to do their parts as well. And then the value piece becomes so important that it's kind of the centerpiece of this whole plan, that this is what makes things different for different families. That, coming back, what do I value as part of this? What are we really looking for? What do we expect to be here for those that are going to come back and be involved in this, right? And, another might be borrowed from another American quote here, but, right, ask when you come back, if you're from that junior gen, asking what can I do for the farm versus what the farm can do for me. I see a lot of trade-offs in families, right, between that old proverbial adage, right? I always look at it a little bit that no one is owed a farm, and some would say, you know what, I was given this opportunity. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that opportunity's there as well. And so I see that as a kind of a trade-off that different families have different choices to make as part of what they value, right? The classic fair and equal, there's a different definition for every family about what that's going to look like. And in this, for my values, am I ready to kind of change my mindset and take this plan on and say, now I'm the leader kind of implementing this plan for what we want to get accomplished? What are our relationships? What do we value in these relationships that we want to chunk out and make sure we keep penciling that to move it forward? And I think time and time again, this is one that gets skipped over in quick family meetings. We might be close as a family, but we jump over it and we don't actually reinforce that. Again, was meeting with a large farm up in Dawson Creek, and they actually heard this from Dad. What ultimately the message was that the family was the most important thing to him and what they wanted to get accomplished. And honestly, that shared sense of owning that as a family went such a long ways for them. Even though it was just a quick thing, they were a close family, but it was something they never verbalized or wrote down to put into action. And then identifying, what are the benefits to keeping this plan moving forward? What opportunity does this provide for everybody involved? And what's going to set everybody up for individual success in these plans, right? Even if they're not coming back to the farm, what sets people up individually to be successful in their own lives, even if they might be more family than necessarily part of the larger farm? So it's a lot of pieces, and then, right, chunking out the business pieces on the bottom here, right? That there's going to be factors as well that we can ask ourselves. What is the size of our farm? How much of our current asset base do we need to continue to grow to be transitioned and things like that? Do we have those financial strategies that we covered today? And what's our plan for revenue? So if things change, or can we expand? Can we answer those questions? And so not necessarily filling it all out, but using this as a bit of a tool to kind of goal set is a great way to start to visualize, okay, we've got the shapes of getting to know ourselves and what we really want is a great way to kind of use this tool. And then you can take it forward and you can say, all right, I'm ready. I've done the soul searching. I know what I want. I know what I'm looking for. And I can play the transition dating game. And what are those things that I'm out there looking for? Right, and so what do we want to do in the short term, right? And that becomes a big one, those 3 bachelors that we were looking at, right? Your short term, your medium term, your long term goals that are there. That what do we want to get accomplished? In the beginning, right, it's always a lot of hope and that uncertainty that we talked about that really sticks out. And we don't necessarily have the answer when we're starting, right? We're kind of searching for it and feeling it out, but we want to mimic a behavior that's going to go forward in these transition plans to start to set expectations about how we're going to work in a process for what we want. That the number one thing I see is that when you're early in these plans, that your actions are going to get mimicked far more than what you say, right? That if you're living some of those financial tools and putting it out there, you're leading good process, that those actions carry down, that the whole family sees the weight of that impact, and they get to move forward and kind of pick it up rather than just saying, you should do this, that kind of living it and saying, hey, we're going to embrace this process goes a long ways from the leadership of the farm to when that next generation comes in. We're going to get to know our junior partner that might be coming back into the farm a little bit too, right? We're going to say, there's been a lot of labels we've probably put on them as that next gen coming into the farm. They've probably grown a lot in their time. How do we get to know them now as a business partner rather than just, you're kind of this big? And I always go back to, there's a farm I met with. The youngest brother was the one that was taking over the farm. He had 2 older sisters that, called him by his childhood name, right? It was kind of strung out. And, he's 32 years old. He'd been there 12 years, kind of running the farm. Parents had full confidence to take over. And, you're saying, this is who he is now. He is the business leader of this farm kind of going forward, that, he's not that little boy that you guys saw and are thinking that he's getting such a deal. He's been there working on the farm 12 years, and he's got a different set of skills and characteristics that he's going to go forward with. And then am I being a good manager, right? Are those things that I can kind of do that audit of how I'm going to build a process to be mimicked, that am I setting expectations early? Am I teaching? Am I providing feedback? And other separate things that, we can keep putting on the table to work towards some clarity are really important in the early stages of these plans. And for the junior generation, when you're coming into these plans, right, and we're kind of in the short term, what do we want to think about, right? That, these are intense discussions, right? We're searching for answers. We wish there was some answers immediately, but, it's a really stressful decision to kind of work through, and it can be overwhelming. So we want to have a little empathy when we go back to this and bring that back to what can I do for the farm versus what the farm can do for me. And we want to start to talk about who's accountable and who's responsible for certain decisions, right? I think the first time I vocalized that I wanted to go back to the farm, I think I was 10 years old, and I said, Dad, I'd like to come here and farm with you. I just have one condition. All the bins on this farm have to be hopper bottomed, right? And the only thing I saw that whole summer was a grain shovel and tuck tape to fix old bins. And I said, I want to farm, but I don't want to do this. And then as we're planning and we're looking forward, right, and now somebody's got to buy bins, I say, well, maybe we'll buy bins next year, right? That, maybe seeing the other side of the shovel isn't that actually that bad when you're the one that's responsible for that. And then looking a little bit at what's the skill set I'm going to bring into the farm. I think we've heard it here as well, but when you're early in these plans, you've got such an opportunity for focus when you're just coming back into the farm, right, that you can really develop a skill set that you're going to bring back to that farm and say, I'm going to own this piece of it, and I've got the opportunity here to focus on financials, marketing, production, one piece that I can really build a core skill set in to move forward. And you have this incredible opportunity early in your career to focus and kind of really dial into how you're going to improve that for yourself and start to become an active participant in the process, right? I think it's something that we can bring proposals, we can bring ideas forward, things that we've heard, things we'd like to see, and submit them, right? We want to do that, though, with some empathy, right? Bringing it forward that maybe the senior gen in this short term doesn't quite have the plan figured out, that, hey, here's some things, some ideas that we heard a great method that was used this morning, right? Ways to frame it, to understand the position that they're in and what they're trying to get accomplished in the short term is what we want to do. Then everybody, right, whether you're dating or whether you're this, right, somebody says, yeah, it'd be nice if it was a little bigger, right? That, right, that it's not exactly something that we want to figure out, right? Even though larger farms, right, have some problems here that the things come up. But we want to identify what those common issues are. So there's a lot of issues out there that come up, and we want to start to say, we might not experience all of these in a huge factor, but I would say most farms experience it to some degree. Whether that's right in your family circle, right? Whether that's we're not quite on the same page to get that same value plan going forward. We're not quite on the same page to have, maybe there's some entitlement issues when you're coming back onto the farm or things like that. And for some farms, right, that's a really small issue. For some farms, it can be a really large issue about who's coming back. Maybe we have different ways to deal with conflict, things like that. And in our business, right, how do we start to provide that method to identify, are we going to have some issues with role clarity here if we have multiple people involved? Can we separate our family and our business to make different decisions for what we want to get accomplished? The classic, right? We've got different ideas of what work-life balance is going to look like that, right? I think the last big one here I heard, right, is that Dad was so mad that the tractor wasn't getting fixed on a Friday when, right, the son wanted to go to a hockey game and nobody was going to use that tractor for a couple weeks and trying to come up with, is it an immediate issue that we need to be mad about? But it was something kind of rumbling under the surface that Dad was feeling a little disrespected about some things that hadn't been coming up in the past. And so getting to kind of the root of what those are goes a long ways. And then common ownership issues too, right? That there's a lot of things when we're thinking about ownership in these plans. Are we trying to grow? Are we trying to harvest? Are we trying to transfer assets or not? And so starting to identify what those goals are and early, starting to pull out some of these key problems that might come our way can start to help us say, maybe it's not that big if we start to tackle it early and we build good process. Because then we heard again this morning a few times that we're in this unique industry a little bit. I do think it is a bit unique in some aspects that, the market value of the assets we're trying to go and trying to expand into are increasing a little bit beyond our productive capability, right? Other factors influence land and things like that. And so commonly, right, the next gen is saying, hey, if I don't rent this land or jump in to buy something now, I might not get that chance in the future. Where the senior gen is saying, we've built this farm to a place where we're pretty comfortable. We're looking at slow back. I don't really want to go out and finance a whole ton of inputs or something like that to go forward. And so navigating through what it's going to look like here. And there's a lot of other farms that are around that are in places to kind of pick up and move forward, that they've got, they've got the ability to, they have extra equipment, they can pick up land, they can kind of move forward and start to chunk that out, that we do have some unique characteristics to unpack in that too, and we have to look at how that's going to impact in our business plan, right? And so in those short-term stages, what happens a lot is we're unpacking all these things, and we start to not necessarily put it on the table, and we start to make assumptions from both sides, from both generations, about what's going to happen, or if only they would just understand that this is the place. I'll stand back here, but if this is kind of the, if they only would understand it from my perspective, or things like that, and these unmet expectations build, and that's where frustration builds and builds in these plans a little bit, right? That we don't have clarity, and we're searching for answers, so we make up our own story because we don't necessarily kind of do these plans together. So some of the signs I see in families when, what are those characteristics when it's popping up are pretty obvious, right? Is that we've got kind of low standards for what we expect from everybody on the farm. We're often a little bit disorganized in terms of what we're trying to get accomplished or use information or formalizing process. Things become a little bit secretive, right? That I'll tell you when you need to know kind of things come up, or we react to problems that, right, rather than maybe address some of those problems we identified early, that we just wait until it's a big issue and we blow up one day or things like that. And we start to become a little distant early in plans, and those expectations pull us farther and farther apart, because I make up my idea of what I want to happen, and the senior gen makes up their idea of what they think our last conversation was. And when it's going really well, what are the things that we want to be on the lookout for, right? That we've got high standards for what we expect from each other, how we're going to treat each other, be with each other. Things are systemic, right? We can see the whole value, the whole picture, all the parts kind of tying together. We're inclusive, right? People get to support what they help build. They get their ideas put in, and we get to kind of create these systems that are inclusive and proactive, and we kind of don't wait on some of those problems, that we're building relationships. And it gets to be a really healthy process to start to do that, because when we get stuck in that bad one, it gets hard to kind of fight our way out of that, because things compound. And then somebody asks, yeah, okay, that's great. Now can I pick more than one if I'm out there, right? And I say, yeah, but it's going to come with some more rules, right? If you're trying to make it work, that right, you got more than one successor coming back into the farm. You want to look at it, and you're going to have sweat equity things that you want to talk about and put on the table. You want to talk to that next gen early about what it is to work together, right? It's always a little bit like being in a second marriage, I think, that when we've got multiple siblings coming into a business, we need to be really clear with, what these agreements are going to look like, how we're going to work together. Do we need separate businesses, and how are we going to deal with conflict when things come up? And then you're at a place, right? You're ready to make it official, right? You're starting to look for some ideas in this medium term here. How am I going to make this process official and start to put things out there to kind of tie it together in the medium term at least? Right, and so there's a lot of different ways to do that, but there's a lot of different plans that pop up in the medium term here, right? And I always look at that short term a little bit as, it's a good place to get to know each other, and right, sometimes things don't work out, right? And sometimes, right, that you met them and, right, it's something that, didn't work out, but there's a lot of plans that we kind of put on the side if we want to make it official. That I see lots of different types of transition plans when we're kind of in this medium-term plan, that somebody says, okay, we're going to switch things up and go cold turkey, that we've got a plan, and our plans, 1 year from now, we'd like to be done, and you're going to take over the farm, and we're going to go down to Phoenix or things like that. And I say, well, that's a lot to put on this person to just step in and kind of take a role, and you guys are pulling back and keeping ownership and maybe not really talking about, what this actually means. Or we delay, right, that we're not quite sure what we want to get accomplished, so we wait on a plan, and the longer we delay, the less options we have as part of a plan. Or I see a lot where, we're part of the plan, we're here today, we're gone, maybe we take off at other times, then we pop back in, right? We change recommendations, or then we're gone again, and right, and this leads to a lot of frustrations in plans and things that build up. And what we want to try to create is kind of this gradual, consistent process where over time we're slowly increasing responsibility in the medium term, starting to really work on those management fundamentals, and transferring that management and labor capacity so that we can start to pull back from a plan. Right, and so how do you make it official, right? I'm going to talk about a few things that, I throw past families, the things you want to think about. As you've progressed through this expectation setting piece in the short term, you're now in the medium term where you're starting to talk and work through those strategic plans that got talked about. You're starting to look at the business ownership, right? How do we get you involved in the day-to-day decisions that are going to have an impact back to that business? And how do we kind of get you involved financially so that you start to feel the responsibility or the accountability of this plan too? That I see plans where we've done that delay one, and now we're transitioning to someone who's in their late 40s or even, I've seen them even later, and they've never made a financial decision on the farm or had that kind of responsibility. And the senior generation's wondering why they won't step up. And we're talking a little bit about, you've treated them like a hired person their whole life, and now you're asking them to kind of step into this leadership role. That's what we want to try to build in the medium term, is try to build that management capacity and look at how we start to become accountable for the decisions we make, right? Like that grain bin example, right? That now when you got to buy it, right, it's a little easier to swing the shovel too. So I always give credit to Merle Good, that first one that I thought, in this medium term, this made a lot of sense when I was looking at my own plan, that in this medium term, what do we kind of want to get accomplished and look at, right? I think you really want to go back and look at how do we get involved in the business piece, right? What's that going to mean? So how do we make sure, if we're coming back in a medium term, that we get to be part of what that operating entity is, right? Whether it's cattle or equipment or different operating debt structures that might be there, and how do we see the day-to-day inflows of our business before we start jumping into some of the other ones, right? The personal wealth that we're all wondering about as well, land, things like that, and then kind of off-farm assets. That in that medium term, you really want to look at how do I become a good manager and how do I understand what the business requirements are going to be for me. And to do that, right, you're going to use a couple more tools, right? So you're going to use your strategy conversations, right? You're going to recognize where's the business been, what's all the hard work that's gone into getting us where we are today, and where are we going to go with it in the future, right? So how are we speaking to the next gen about where's this business going to go in the future, what's the opportunity for them, and then testing those expectations that we talked about in the short term, right? That what makes it great to be in business together today? What are we enjoying? What are we having fun with? How could it be even better? And then how are we going to commit to making that happen so that you can take these pieces in the medium term and work it forward a little bit more into your strategy of what you're going to get accomplished and put it into more of a positive spin. And the other piece of that business that you want to identify maybe in the medium term as well is starting to look a little bit at, we've talked about structures for tax reasons and things like that, but what's it going to look for us to kind of operate together? Do we want to be in one entity, one business that we do everything together? If we've got multiple siblings coming into a business, right? Does that change our dynamic or our relationships, right? Who gets paid for what activities, right? Whose crops get seeded first? Who has to go check cattle at 3 in the morning? Or do we want to run separate businesses where we work together on a farm, and what's going to be efficient for us to share equipment but maintain some individual ownership? And so there's a different philosophical thing that every family can kind of look at in the medium term of when we're bringing the next gen in, what are the goals that we want to get accomplished here, and then how is it going to transition long term so that they get to be in a place where they're going to make some of those decisions. And so this is a busy slide. Again, I'm not putting it all up there, but we talked a lot about financials, and this is one that I've really come to appreciate. Larry Martin had kind of put this together, and BDO did a lot of the benchmark work on it. It's just a method of kind of looking at your business and starting to pull out some things and understand, what are some different ways we can use this. And I always use this joke that when I'm doing transition planning and I'm trying to find these tools, that how do we pull things out and have conversations that, if I'm sitting with 4 pipeline welders in the Crete, right, going to the feelings part isn't where we're going first, right? That I need a tool that I can pull out and start to talk about how do we pull this out and talk about some of the issues in our business that we might be experiencing, right? So I used to just break it down as an income statement, just an income statement. I used to break it out as a dollar, but it's one way that you can kind of get some conversation rolling a little bit about what do we expect in our business, that what are those projections that we heard from, heard a little bit earlier about what's the outlook going to be, what's our general strategy going forward. Somebody's coming up, they've got an idea, they want to rent some land, they want to buy some land. How are we going to go down to our contribution margin here and start to identify how good is our farm at converting our inputs to our outputs so that you can use that contribution margin as a way to make that decision for where you're going to go. We've got overhead. Are there right, some educational opportunities, things we can invest in as a farm, and what's that going to do to our business that someone coming back in, what are the processes and pieces that we could finance a little bit more out of this operation to make sure we're building those skill sets? Or, right, seeking out professional expertise as well to bring in and kind of guide us. And then looking at how we're using our cost of capital and things like that. what is our business model for how much is coming out for land rent, things like that, that you can pull together to say, what is our future going to look like? And start to chunk it out and then pull out the different issues and say, when you get to the bottom, how much room after our day-to-day business operations do we have for multiple families, 2 families? And if we don't, that might be okay, right? It might mean that you're working off farm as well to kind of make that happen. And what are the realities, right? That's going to mean different things, that maybe mom and dad are involved in the business a little bit longer day to day, and maybe you're working off farm to kind of support that place to where you get to. And so this is one that gets missed a lot, I see, in kind of farm transition plans, is pulling those financials and starting to put it on the table and say, what are the different decisions we've got to make with the performance of our business and where we take that going forward? So again, it's a great tool. There's lots of information out there on it, but it's one I like to use this model because it is simple. We take our accrued statement over 5 years and kind of chunk it out and see how we're doing, and then identify the places that we can do a little bit better and have some of these conversations. Right, but it takes some time to get this accomplished, right? And right, in the proverbial words of the old Kanye West, maybe not the new one, but right, just trying to get my money right, to figure it out is what I hear a lot of in families too, that, right, we want to get this figured out. We want to try to pencil it out, and we're not quite sure, but so going into these agreements, knowing that it's going to take a little bit of time for us to work this through and process and start to pull it out and unpack certain things. Right, but don't delay too long, I guess. And long term, you want to talk a little bit about how you're going to keep this process fresh, right? It's one that I think is on the minds of a lot of senior generation, right? That we go through this process, and who do I become? Once we've kind of moved a little bit farther in this process of identifying what our longer term goals are, right? The old check-ins, kind of the reassurance and involvement, that they still have an important role in this, right? To be that CEO or kind of guide to see things go forward. Are we setting clear boundaries, though, around what things are going to mean? Because I do see a lot where, decisions get piloted back into when we've talked about transitioning certain decisions that, it's pretty easy to step back in there and say, I kind of miss making the rules. And so have we talked about what those boundaries are and identifying and maybe framing it when it happens? And in this new role, how are we going to support kind of that, the senior generation, but also the junior generation coming back in to kind of find that purpose for what the role is going to look like for them and where they get involved? And what I hate to see a lot of is kind of that contentment, I think, right? Is that when I see this in plans, right, proverbial kind of eye rolls when we're talking about what we want to get accomplished as a family, I think that's the one that we really want to be careful of, that when we're trying to implement or manage anything, that, if there's some contempt that's kind of been built up over the years, that that's where we want to kind of address it and start to talk about it, right? It takes the time to unpack those things, but it's the one that I think kind of the long-term killer of kind of the family dynamic and the relationship, and that starts early in setting those expectations to kind of avoid that contempt in the long run. And then you get to a place where we're trying to enforce kind of long-term agreement, right? What do we want to get accomplished in the long term? And we kind of want to start to make sure that we've got that agreement. And I mentioned, I think I skipped over it, but I had mentioned one earlier too, that these are things we want to kind of put down there in writing, right? If it's not in writing, it's not necessarily real. That time and time again, you walk away from conversations and I hear, I think a conversation went one way, and somebody will call me down the road, and junior generation, conversation went, they completely misinterpreted what was getting said, and senior generation completely misinterpreted. So we do want to put these things down on paper at some point to start saying, yeah, this is what we actually meant. Everybody here agrees to this, so you don't make it up. And we did hear some good governance ones today as well, but it becomes part of how we operate as a farm and maintaining that consistent process. Even though, right, like as we put it back in that dating analogy, right, you're getting out there to date, sometimes there's family meetings or farm meetings you don't want to go to, or you think, wow, that was a waste of time, right? I should have stayed home in Prince Albert, right? That you got to kind of go back and come at this and keep circling back through each of these things so that you kind of keep that consistent process and keep chunking along and moving forward, and then revisit it to see what's the right amount for us as a family. And you want to kind of pull out for the senior gen as part of those long-term goals. I think talking about early, this one gets missed a lot, but where are their needs going to be met as they start to pencil things going forward? Are they maintaining active farm business in this, right? As we're starting to think about it, are they going to stay a long-term business member of this farm? And what does that mean for pieces of companies or things like that as they go forward? What does that mean for multiple draws from family income? And does that mean, right, maybe assets might transfer a different way? Do they have a plan where they're more going to rent assets back to the farm and start to say, okay, I'd rather just pull back from the operations, but I'm maybe not ready to give up ownership? And I think, right, that can be frustrating at times, but as long as the next gen's got a clear idea that that's what you're coming into, you can work with that, right? Then you can move forward and you can say, well, this is my opportunity. This gives me knowing that I might not have to rebuy something from them, knows that I can go buy something from, the farm next door, or if there's a piece of land that comes up, that I can choose to use the dollars I've been generating to buy something, rather than always kind of sitting there and wondering, are they waiting for me to buy them out? Do I need to hold ownership? Do I need to save some cash to fund mom and dad's lifestyle? So trying to be clear about this in kind of your long-term plan as well goes a long ways in sort of easing that tension or that dynamic of, can I go forward, can I expand, versus do I need to save something to kind of buy from mom and dad to make sure that they've got they're not staying home and eating cat food kind of thing, right? That they've got what they need to kind of move forward with. Or, right, do they have off-farm investment savings, and then kind of looking at from a whole family perspective. And then the other piece, right? And again, this is another busy slide, but it's not necessarily wanting to go through all of it. It was just to say, there's a lot of different methods that are going to be out there. So it becomes critical to find the right advisors for us at the right time too, to talk about how we formalize these plans in the long term, that, we've got a lot of different things to think about for those long-term goals. And if you can kind of think through them early, it does help a lot when you actually get to the place where you're ready to do these things, right? You've got to think about ownership transfer a little bit. The proverbial fair and equal between all of our children. What do we want to get accomplished? Are there ways to kind of keep the farm together, to transfer ownership? How are we going to finance that between us, right? A lot of different ways. Are we comfortable financing things between family members directly, or should we seek a third party that's going to do that for us? What's that optimal organizational structure that's out there for us that's going to really clarify our dynamic and how we work together? And then, right, starting to put good legal agreements in place, right? Matching wills to our estate plans, right? Marriage contracts, things like that we've building in certainty to these plans about what's going to happen, so that everybody's got certainty about what the plan is and isn't kind of left hanging. And then, right, all the fun stuff that you can do in different tax planning scenarios. And not forgetting about our family kind of in the long run of this process, right? That we want to keep this consistent governance, even if there's times that we feel like, we got nothing to talk about today, that it can be short and we can kind of build some things for the future. We want to continue to set expectations even after some of these things have happened, right? I see lots of cases where parents maybe change their minds, down the road or things like that, right? They might feel a little miffed about something that happened, that we had different expectations, and plans change. So we want to continue this process of meeting expectations. Are we where we thought we were? Are we making the right decisions for us? And then how do we have kind of some conflict resolution plans in place, and that's a normal, healthy part of a business? And are there mediators or coaches or facilitators, mental health professionals that we might need to bring in as well if we're dealing with other long-term sort of family issues and things like that we should be looking out for? So it's a lot of information. There's a lot of different ways to kind of plan. Every time you do a farm succession presentation, I always think, what are the different ways that I should maybe look at this or tackle this? That always feels like you're leaving so much out at times, putting so much in. And so what you really want to do is kind of encourage that early process. Put yourself in the shoes of the other party as you're going forward. Look to enhance kind of the knowledge that's out there. We do have tons of resources on our FCC website, tons of resources on Farm Management Canada as well. Do that self-work early, right? If you're looking for that business model canvas, happy to share it or give it out to whoever wants it. Do that self-work and say, am I ready to kind of do this and move forward? Identify that process a little bit for our short term. Think through the medium term, right? That short term, we really want to build our expectations and be clear about what it's going to look like and get some clarity on the business. The medium term, we really want to build that management capacity and start to talk about how we work as a whole unit and provide clarity for what everybody's going to be dealing with. And then long term, we want to get to this ownership piece and start to think through what it's going to look like and how do we make sure we've got things kind of written out and agreed to, at least, for what's going to happen long term. And then consider those different strategies or different tools. That there's a lot of tools out there, and pick the ones that are kind of right for your family to lead through your own process. And identify, some areas that if this is going to have a significant impact, if we maybe do the wrong things or things like that, which advisors should we bring in at the right time? So it can go a long ways if you do that, and then as well, document those decisions down that we might not have them early, but as we progress, we want to be writing those down that time and time again, see that if it's not written down, it's not necessarily real. So those are some things you want to take into account in your plan and keep chunking along as you go forward. And so with that, I'll close things there and happy to take any questions and